At 28 years old, I was shot and paralyzed from the chest down. I had two options. I could stop and let the things I cannot control me, or I could move forward and put my energy into things that would improve my life and those around me. I chose to move forward and surround myself with risk takers, innovators, and leaders who've chosen the same path. Join us on the journey. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Forward with me, Derek Herrera, and my guest today, Andrew Marr. Andrew is a former Green Beret and now a nonprofit leader who serves as the founder and CEO of the Warrior Angels Foundation. Andrew sustained repeated trauma and injury to his brain that sent him down a dangerous cycle of medications and victimhood until he took control of his recovery and worked to fundamentally change the way brain injury and concussions are treated, not just for himself, but for so many others. We discuss the lowest points in his life, where he was close to suicide, and the decision he made at that point to take control and push forward while blazing a new path to recovery. Andrews refused to accept what many doctors told him and was able to work collaboratively with world-leading researchers to develop new treatments and therapeutic modalities for anyone suffering from brain injury. This journey is documented in a book that he authored called Tales from the Blast Factory, and also a documentary which was just released with Joe Rogan called Quiet Explosions. Both the book and movie are available on Amazon, so check them out, or visit his website, which is www.warriorangelsfoundation.org to learn more. At that website also, in addition to the services they provide, which are personalized therapies for anybody suffering from traumatic brain injury or repeated concussions, they also offer nutraceuticals and supplements, which actually have been well researched to show benefits to some people dealing with these types of issues. So definitely check it out and learn more at warriorangelsfoundation.org. After chatting with him, I feel like Andrew and I have a lot in common. We both were injured in the line of duty, and we both made a conscious decision to move forward and push beyond that and to push the limits of what was known at the time in the medical research community to try to change and alter the way people recover from injuries that we both were suffering from. So I truly hope you enjoy this episode of Forward with Andrew Marr. And as always, if you enjoy this podcast, please consider sharing with any of your friends, family, colleagues, or anyone you think may benefit. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving us a 5-star review, any comments, so we can improve the podcast while also expanding our reach and help others who may not already be in our tribe or network. Thank you again for listening, and hope you make it a phenomenal week. Andrew, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Derek, man, I'm fired up to be here, to see you digitally, and to have a discussion, man, about life.
Heck yeah. Yeah, it's an honor to have you on. Really excited to dive into the specifics of your personal experience and share some of the amazing lessons that you've learned with the audience. So to get started, I mentioned you're Army Special Forces veteran. What drove you to pursue a career in the military, or pursue the decision to enlist in the military?
Well, Derek, I got my sleeves rolled up, so I'm ready to go to work, man. So let's get after it. Why the military? I was an athlete my entire life, college athlete, played college football, was successful there. Not successful enough that the NFL came knocking. So the question I had for myself is, well, what am I supposed to do with my life now? And grew up in a very patriotic family. My mother always reinforced that freedom isn't free, and it's born and preserved with the blood of patriots. and that was never lost on me. It's kind of ingrained in my DNA from the earliest ages, even when you don't really know how to comprehend that. It was there. I look back on it later, and I kind of understand where she was coming from. But quite simply, it was 2006. We were in the middle of the engagements that we were in, and I wanted to do more. I wanted to serve. I wanted to be a part of something unique. I wanted to be a part of something greater than myself. I wanted to take the ultimate test, which is to challenge oneself in combat. And to me, I looked at all the special operations arenas, and I was just finished my undergrad, like you said, and I thought the best thing for me with my unique style and characteristics, attributes would be Army Special Forces, and I went that route and took to it like a fish in water. And I'll have to say that my parents were just taken back; they could not believe how or why I would want to go the enlisted route with all the other swine after I just finished my undergrad. My brother had just commissioned the same time that I had enlisted, and they were just dead set against it. But I said, well, I know exactly what I want to do, and it's X, Y, and Z. And they finally got behind me. They were very supportive, but they gave me a hard time out the gate.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I would say you were probably, smarter, right? It was probably a smarter decision, right? Because for those of you listeners that don't know, as an officer, you get to spend a good bit of time. It's a little more challenging in some aspects to get to a special operations unit, and then once you're there, you have these varied assignments, and you're not really in the teams, performing the day-to-day combat operations near as much as the enlisted men that are making up the backbone of all those teams. And so a lot of people have figured that out. A lot of smart people have figured that out. I didn't figure that out, right? I ended up in the Naval Academy and became an officer, which was fine, but
Yeah.
and an awesome route, and I was very fortunate to even make it to the community. But even if I had stayed, I'd gotten injured and cut short. But if I'd stayed, I wouldn't have been in a team for a long time, right? Whereas
Yeah,
enlisted
2 or 3 years,
stay.
right? Hey, Derek,
Yeah,
I'm interested in your experience. So, in my company, in first group, for instance, just as a microcosm, we had PhDs, we had master's degrees, like aerospace engineers, like the weirdest dudes, and
yeah,
the wide spectrum of talents and abilities, and none of them were interested in the officer role, and I'm no way, shape, or form downplaying that. I'm just talking about
yeah,
the uniqueness that was brought out and was
yeah,
there from individuals. And in special operations, everybody's a leader, and in absence of leadership, you're going to lead. And those type of individuals, they have no problem with doing that. But I thought that was very unique, man. I'm talking like whether it was
yeah,
childhood actors, like I said, PhDs, the wildest group of cats you would ever see.
yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. It's and I was just talking to someone else about this, but it's one of the most diverse groups you could imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think we have too many. We've had a couple PhDs, that have ended up in the teams, but we're still new. So the
Yeah,
Marine Raider brand, right, is
yeah,
we're new to SOCOM, right? Marine Recon and Force Recon have been around for a long time, which is awesome, but they haven't been in SOCOM until 2006, and so we have a new brand, and hopefully over time we'll get more people like that, but I do know a lot of SEALs that, like you said, were a PhD in astrophysics and then enlisted the next day, right? And
yeah.
just amazing, and or like Olympic gold medalist, right?
Yes.
Signs up for buds. Um, the common thread is people that love challenges, high performers, and those looking to take it to the next level, and obviously, like you said, sacrificing for a cause greater than yourself. Um, so it's very special and awesome. And so you entered in 2006. Did you do you basically went straight to the Q
Yeah, it's
course, right?
called
Through 18 X-ray?
exactly. It's called the
Gotcha.
X-ray program, and yep,
Nice.
that's the route that was taken. And very small success rate there of actually making it all the way through. I don't know what the numbers are today, but when I went through, it was something like 5% that
Mm,
actually started, finished and got to the teams. But the ones that got there usually brought a different set of life experiences and perspectives to the teams. And in my experience, man, they did extremely well. The ones that were immature and weren't ready for that obviously got weeded out before they had the opportunity to go in there and get in that dynamic. But yeah, the X-ray,
Yeah.
and that's what I knew I wanted to do. And they had that pipeline, so I was able to jump right in it and off the street, go through that pipeline right into the Special Forces qualification course after selection.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. And actually, that's what a lot of people ask me about now when I've mentored a few folks who are young and thinking about trying to get into the community, and they're like, "I want to be a Marine Raider," and I'm like, "Time out! Like, you can't sign up to be a Marine Raider, right? You can't. Like, we don't have an X-ray program or what they call a street to soft program.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get a specialty for a minimum of 2 years, and then demonstrate proficiency before you can even have the chance to go to selection. And so for enlisted guys, it's a little easier, but especially for officers, like the timing is so hard. And so when I was going through, it was really challenging. I was incredibly lucky to even get a seat to the training course. And then after
Mm-hmm.
that, even incredibly lucky to find a team because we were just figuring it out and super small at that time. So the takeaway, I guess, is in general, what I would say is, if you're dead set on being a special operator, you need to enlist and sign up for buds or sign up for the 18 X-ray program, because that's the only guaranteed shot you get, right, to be
Yeah.
in the community.
And I can see value in both. And they brought back the X-ray program. It was in place during Vietnam, as I understand it. Then who was it? Gates brought it back, which is funny because one of the soft imperatives and truths is that special operations soldiers can't be mass produced, but they seem to think that they could open up the field to more applicants. So I kind of understand that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it used to be like, hey, you needed to be in there and you needed to experience the Army. And that way you can think inside the box, because you need to learn the box before you can start to step outside of the box. And I think that was kind of the thought process behind it. Again, though, like you said, I see the value in making it very difficult, so only a few select individuals can get through there, because they have that maturity level where they can just say, okay, we can put them in there and we can teach them the small unit tactics. We can teach them the other things, but the inherent abilities that they have, well, that's exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you enlisted, got through the Q course. What was the first group you went to, and what was your first like operational workups and deployments like?
I graduated the Q course in 2009. I went to first group, and there's now 4 battalions, but there's one in just south of Seattle in Tacoma, Joint Base Lewis McChord. I was there, and then we have another forward operating base in Okinawa. And I spent all my time in first group. I was blessed to be on the same ODA from the moment I got there in 2009 until my medical retirement in 2015. I think I got to the team in October of 2009, and I was boots on the ground in Helmand, Afghanistan in December of that year.
Wow. October to December. Yeah. Wow. It's a quick
No,
workup.
the workup I got was like, "Hey, man, here's your ammo, here's your gear, zero
Yeah.
in, and how are you with IEDs? And let's go." And it was a true baptism by fire, like
Jeez.
out the gate. And in 2009, 2010, Helmand was the Wild West, and it was IED City specifically at that time. And so I got to really become proficient at some of my field craft techniques.
Yeah. Yeah, that's impressive. What part of Helmand did you guys end up at, and were you working with Marines there?
We were in Firebase Robinson,
Oh yeah.
just south of Nole. There, yeah, right off the dirt highway. We were there. We're basically holding white space, and yeah, we worked with Marines. We worked with the SEALs. I forget what group was there at the time, and we worked with a lot with the British as well.
Nice. Yeah, so that's it's our old stomping ground. So that's where we'd send our company headquarters, our AOB, there, and they were actually ended up being based out of there. Like they were continue to be based out of there as we continue to grow and progress. But yeah, Fob Rob was interesting. And then by the time I'd gotten there, I didn't get there till 2012, but I was at a village stability site
Mm-hmm.
out in other areas running around. having fun. But
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
interesting. Yeah.
It was such a difficult place to get to logistically. Like everything could only come in through airdrops with us. You guys are the same way.
No, I think it actually gotten a lot better at that point. So they ended up paving the roads.
Okay.
Uh, they called it the 611 all the way up to Kajaki Dam and
Yep.
stuff, which was helpful. And so we had some ground resupply options. But what that enabled us to do was, just go further out into the middle of nowhere, right, and continue to isolate ourselves in weird areas. So
Yeah.
yeah, but that's cool. And then also too, it was interesting because I don't know if it was like this when you were there, but when our company deployed, we were in a joint environment, right? So we had 3 Marine teams with our company working with 1 or 2 ODAs and then 1 or 2 SEAL platoons or task units, all working together, doing similar missions. And so it was pretty awesome to see out there.
Yeah, similar setup, a little bit smaller. It was just two ODAs on the site at that time, man. And when you're on the well, at least in our experience in that time frame, half of your life goes to sustaining the base because
Mm.
there is no reinforcements. If the water pump goes down, you got to figure out how to fix it. Generator goes down, there's nobody coming in to do that. So is 60 to 70% of my time was spent like making sure the thing was operational while defending the base. I think we had like something ridiculous, like 19 direct fire attacks on the compound during our deployment
Jeez.
there, and then going out and doing operations. So it was a wild, but it was a great learning experience for sure.
Yeah, and you were in 18 Charlie?
That's correct.
Nice. Yeah, so for anybody listening, 18 Charlie is the engineering and demolitions expert. So all of the base maintenance, all that stuff fell probably squarely in your lap, especially as the new guy, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah. Oh, yeah, for
water
sure.
pumps.
So making sure, yeah, all the stuff that I didn't want to do. And I quickly learned that, hey, the best way to do is to delegate. And so don't actually do it, manage it. And that was a much better use of my time. And I started to scale things from that point. But that was a game changer for me. I was like, I'm not here to swing a hammer. That is a poor use of my skill set. I need to be managing other people to do these things and being truly a force multiplier.
Yeah, that's it. Force multiplication. It's awesome. Cool. And so, so you deploy there 2009, 2010, come back, and then you go back a few times, right? Or like, what was your career like in the Army and your deployment cycle?
It was Afghanistan, Philippines. That was our rotation through that time frame, and then JSETs in Southeast Asia in between.
Gotcha.
So I loved every second of it. I loved it until the point that I couldn't do it anymore. And when that happened, it became a prison. But up until that time, all the nonsense that you had to put up with was worth it because I got to be with the absolute best people that I'd ever been around in my entire life, where I had to bring my A game every day because that's what was demanded of you. And I just could not be able to look myself in the mirror if I thought I was letting somebody else down by not putting out in the way that I had to. And so just I was blessed to be on the same ODA the entire time. And so that becomes your extended family. So we got to do the coolest shit with your best friends. You're jumping out of planes, you're shooting guns, you're blowing shit up, going all over the world. It was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I want to reiterate that too, though. The people really and the culture make that truly special, right? Like there's something very unique and very special that's unreplicated outside of the special operations units at the tactical level that it makes people addicted, right? And want to do that for indefinitely, right? Like you said, right? You would have continued doing it for as long as you could until you were unable to. And so it's really special.
It's to me, man, it's shared sacrifice and shared commitment. And when you step in that arena, like we all did, especially in the time frame that we did, there was no misconceptions about what was going down. We joined up to go to war. And when you step in that arena, you have to have your mind made up. Hey, I will put my life on the line, period. Like, I don't even have to think about it. Done to make sure somebody comes home. To know that you have that level of support across the board, like you said, that doesn't exist anywhere else. It can't. And that just breeds a very specific type of individuals, a very specific type of bond that can only be forged in and from combat. And, I've come to terms that I'm just grateful I had the experience. I'm not looking to replace that anymore. Life presents so many amazing things. And was so blessed to be exposed and to experience that for a long time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and so how did you first begin sustaining different injuries that ultimately led to your medical retirement and departure from the military? Like,
Mm-hmm.
was that on your first deployment? Obviously, well, actually, I mean, obviously, as an 18 Charlie, right, you're exposed to concussive blasts and explosions from day one, right? But specifically with your injuries and how you've described them in the past, can you just explain a little bit about how the progression occurred for you and what it was
Sure.
like and how it culminated?
For sure. Well, I said earlier that my entire life, from age 10 all the way up through senior in college, I was playing football. So then all the way through college ball as well. And I was never knocked out growing up and never aware of any concussions at that time. And, we thought a concussion was somebody gets knocked out and, they go into coma or something to that nature. That's a traumatic brain injury as we understood it. And then we learned, and we'll kind of get into this later, but learning much later what constitutes a actual neurotrauma. It's quite taken aback when you realize the number of neurotraumas that we were exposed to in that line of work. But so what I'm saying is like my resiliency level, even though it wasn't shown, was probably reduced because of that lifetime of contact sports, and that's probably similar for guys in spec ops across the board, and probably like infantry, most infantry cats. Uh, so I never had any significant injuries, zero, and not a scratch on my body. So it was high performer. And my last deployment was to Wardak in 2013 in Wardak, Afghanistan. And we got it on the whole time. And I was only knocked out once in my career, and it was brief. I'm talking like 3 to 5 seconds. And I came to, and we were in the middle of a firefight, and it was back to business as normal. That's about the extent of anything that I could look to in my history and say, well, that might have constituted as something that you could think of as a head injury. But it was I would give it no thought in that deployment just because of the task at hand. And that's no different than anybody else. So it wasn't until, Derek, I got back from my last deployment, and it was about 3 to 6 months after. So it could be that things were diminishing on that deployment, but because we are, everything that we do is so ingrained, it's so muscle memory, it's in our DNA, it's in our central nervous system. You don't have to think about it. You've done it so much, you don't have to think about it. So I don't know if I was suffering any of these cognitive issues during that deployment, because what I was doing, I had done so many times. It just presents itself in, a new and different environments, and you react to that and you go and get the job done. But it wasn't until I got back, like I said, that I started to experience new issues. And so I went from high performer to the contrast of being forced to medically retire, where I was put on double-digit medications, had a laundry list of disorders and disabilities, and you would not recognize the man at that point if he was in front of you today. So it started like this, man. My energies just got completely depleted to the point where I just didn't want to get out of bed. It was very unusual. Then I lost all complete lack of libido. I'm like 32, 33 at the time. Married to the same wonderful, amazing wife today, and who I'm always incredibly attracted to. And she, getting back from combat, she can't understand what's going on here because all of a sudden I can't function anymore in that department. So her question is, or her point of view, you either don't love me anymore or there's somebody else. And I'm like, man, I'm just getting back from this very taxing deployment. And now I got to put up with this nonsense. And but I can understand where her point was. But that started to cause rifts at home from the onset. There, man, I started to have what I'll call like psychological issues. I started to have panic attacks, and
Mm.
before this, I just thought this was a weak-minded individual's issue. So when it came upon me, it was as foreign as a foreign concept could be. I didn't know what was happening, but I started to get these panic attacks, and I would get them in the weight room, in front of my family, at work. And there's nothing you can do about it when it hits. It's like a runaway gun. It's just going to go, and you're on for the ride. You're like a prisoner in your own body, being aware that this thing is going on. That started to become a pretty regular type of deal, and that led to like this anxiety state and this heightened fight or flight state at all times. Then that led into like very advanced stages of depression. Now, here I am. I'm a special forces operator. I'm doing the job that I love. I don't want to do anything else. All I want to do is continue to do it. I'm married to the woman of my dreams. We had the family we always wanted. And now I'm having these panic attacks. Now I'm overcome with depression. And it's like waking up to find out your family was murdered the night before. And that just it's just hovering over you at all times. And I just couldn't fathom. I'm like, what on earth is going on? Then that led to, I started to have physiological issues. So I started to get horrible headaches, and they would go into migraines, which would produce blurry vision, and then that would go into double vision. Started having issues with just my regular balance, and with vestibular damage there. So balance became an issue. Then my cognitive abilities started to really go. My memory, my working vocabulary, my interpersonal skills, and then that went into rage. So acting inappropriately to certain social circumstances that just does not warrant that specific type of reaction. And I'm talking like physically hurting people that there was no business and no reason to do that, man. So very quickly, I mean, this was very quickly, I went from the epitome of an SF guy to somebody who was in a death spiral, going down. And that was kind of the like the start of going in that direction.
Jeez. Yeah. So this is all while you're on active duty, and so this is right around 2013. You mentioned as you came back from Wardak and coming to grips and dealing with this, and it sounds ridiculous. Like, it sounds incredibly challenging, especially from, I think, probably psychologically, right? Like you mentioned, you go from being this barrel-chested freedom fighter, right? Like at the pinnacle of your career, at the height of special operations, to now having to deal with this and being unable to function, essentially, right? Unable to perform your job, unable to make it through the day without having these issues.
Yeah,
And then
I mean,
I would assume one of the most challenging things is the medical advice you were getting at the time, right? Like for me, a lot of people are like, oh, how'd you move forward with that? Whatever else. But I think one of the things about the way I was injured, which I'm fortunate to have, is very acute, right? It's like, boom, I'm shot, have this injury. Okay. Do I recover? Do I not recover? It's whatever. It's what it is. Move forward, right? But it was definitive, right? There was something more definitive as opposed to just waking up and no one being able to tell you what's going on.
yeah. And it goes back to the point that I was talking about earlier. Like, there's not a scratch on my body. There's no significant injuries. At that time, 2013, 14, 15, we really weren't talking about head injuries or potential downstream problems from being in close proximity to chronic blast waves. It wasn't even discussed. And as far as how that affects the neuroendocrine system, like I had to go and find that out myself, but kind of getting ahead of ourselves there. So that was the crazy part, Derek, because it was like, man, well, one, I didn't tell anybody about it. I tried to maintain for as long as I could because I don't know what the fuck is happening.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, like I'm like the most positive, probably beside yourself, one of the most positive people that you'll ever meet. Let's get it done. Let's figure out a way to have solutions. And because I got caught in this negative feedback loop, there was like this inner voice, and there was two different ones, and they were going at it. I call it the darkness, and we're just having this fight over trying to see things through a positive lens and not go to deep dark areas. And the dark side started to win. And I had no idea what was going on. And it got so bad where the panic attacks were so frequent. And I felt like I had this fist coming out of my stomach at all waking hours. And the only thing I knew to do to lessen any of that was to drink. So I started drinking heavily. And I mean, I'm talking drinking on the job, drinking from the moment I wake up until I pass out in the evening. And it wasn't until I was drinking and driving and I realized, like, in one of these few moments of clarity, like, dear God, like, I'm not even grasping the consequences that are coming from these decisions. They're not even going through a decision matrix. It's like, it's no big deal. It didn't even register. And that's when I said, okay, we have a problem here. I am a liability to myself, to my team, to my family. And that's the point in which I raised my hand and I said, listen, I've got to get some help. I don't know what's going on here, man, but everything is breaking down. And my unit was very supportive. They just didn't know what to do. And that started us down the path of, seeing like 13 different specialists and all these different all over the country, and all these different medications that were just made me worse for when I started. And it was traumatic brain injury was never even really talked about. It was like, oh yeah. Well, what you're experiencing right now, it couldn't possibly be from any of those chronic blast wave exposures, the thousands that you were probably around, because those symptoms they're not sustained over long periods of time. So what you're experiencing is from post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress injury. And it never sat well with me because I wasn't hung up on anything that I had done operationally. The special operations arena looks for very specific individuals that are psychologically and physically resilient in the most difficult of circumstances. And I had one psychologist tell me that, well, just think about it like this. You have all these combat experiences, and they're like files in a file cabinet. And you have so many files in there that now the cabinet can't close, and it's all falling out. And this is the manifestation of what you're seeing. And I was just like, man, like, do you have anything to back that up or support that? Or is that just like your opinion? Because that doesn't sit well with me. And that was what I found the most of the medical model to be like. And there was never, like I said, never any talk like, could this be from head trauma? And I started to go back and think, because like, we're trained to be unconventional. We're trained to look at things differently, ask questions, assess where things are at, and where could we potentially find new solutions. And I was just like, okay, let me think about this, man. Okay, we were around a lot of blasts. I wonder if that does anything to the brain. And I went to the scientific literature, even in a depleted state. And I started to find article after article about how that explosive blast waves like propagates this energy and pushes through every air-filled organ of the body. And every time the brain hits the skull back and forth, that by definition is a head injury. And we're talking that happens hundreds, if not thousands of times in a second when you're exposed to like just a breaching charge. And well, insane when you grasp that. And so I started to learn about that. I started to learn about the neuroendocrine system. I started learning about the hypothalamus and the pituitary and how that regulates all the functioning of the body. And that's when I started to ask better questions. And that's what led me to believe, like, I think this is something else, and started to look for answers elsewhere. And that's what kind of started that trend and that trajectory to start. I stopped accepting what the medical establishment was telling me was the truth. And I went out and searched for answers.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like I had a bit of a similar experience in that in some respects as well. I was fortunate because, I kind of quit meds real fast because I found out, right, like, just like you did, right? It's like most doctors want to do a good job, right? And they want to help you. And they only have a limited tool set, right? And so the thing that I didn't understand, or it took me a little while, but I caught on to at some point was, um, doctors are not paid to be innovative, right? They're paid to follow established procedures and established guidelines, and you don't want them to be innovative, right? You don't want every single doctor to like be making it up as they go.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look back and peel it back and do the research and question these sorts of things, because that's the beauty of science, right? Is like we think we know, we have some evidence that suggests certain things, but none of it's immutable, right? Like uh,
Well,
all of it can be
supposedly,
changed supposedly none of it's immutable, right? All of it can be changed with more evidence, with new conditions, new environmental changes. Like there's more inputs to the dynamic system that and we learn more, and technological breakthroughs and everything else. And so um, I had a very similar experience, I think, and that was when I also started to take ownership of my own recovery and advocacy for my own care and those sorts of things. And um, did the same thing where I quit meds and just pushed forward and started pursuing all kinds of experimental things and figuring out and asking dumb questions, right? Like, you're saying you can't do this, why, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, and I know how many clinicians I pissed off by doing that, but I also got a great education in learning about really what the boundaries are and the limitations and what the state of the art is for any of these sorts of things. And so it's really impressive. And I want to go back though too, just briefly. So you talk a lot about this in your TED talk, but you mentioned there was an instant when you took ownership of this and made this decision as you kind of had all of this personal catastrophe crumbling, where your wife asked you, a favor as she's going into labor with your fifth child, and then you have this other, personal injuries and life-threatening conditions to yourself, right? And
Mm-hmm.
above and beyond like physiological life-threatening conditions, not just the other neuroendocrine issues you mentioned as well, um, but it's really powerful. And so I'd love to just hear a little bit about what that was like and what that moment meant for you, and how you know things had progressed, and whether it was kind of a gradual shift and then just kind of this punch in the face where you realized how things were going, or and how you made the decision
Mm-hmm.
and decided to move forward in a different direction.
I had become like a runaway 18-wheeler Mack truck going down a mountain with the brakes out on a road, on a path certain to end in absolute disaster, not just for the individual, but for whoever they hit and run into along the way. That's kind of where I was at. And like you said, we had this very unique circumstance as well. So it'd be made apparent. I was finally like, "Hey, okay, you can't take any more blows to the head. We don't know what it could do. It could be potentially fatal." And because of that, you're no longer going to be able to do this job, so you're going to be medically retired. So I'm having all, like you said, all of these problems, all these symptoms that has just made my life to the point where I think it's not worth living anymore, and I'm causing such harm. I think the best way to only go about it is to remove myself so my family can be free of me. And drinking so heavily. My wife was 9 months pregnant with our fifth child, Jojo, and she had to ask me, "Hey, Andrew, can you keep your drinking down today in case I go into labor, so I don't have to drive myself to the hospital?" And it didn't get better from there. And no, I didn't stop drinking. And I was having this pain in my calf for like the last 3 days. And I thought it was just a strain from working out. So I was doing my best to work through that. But the pain got so overwhelming that it was like debilitating. And then, so Becky is due to go in labor like that week. So her mom is flying in from Florida into Washington State where we were at. So we go to pick her up at the airport. Now, my boy Jace is my oldest son. He was born during my last deployment. He's 13 months old at the time. He has this genetic condition where he has a lymphatic malformation, this huge growth that ended up manifesting in his neck and just wrecked his life for a while, all of ours. and to see your children suffer is the most difficult thing in the world. But we went to go pick up my mother-in-law from the airport. Jace's neck was fine by the time when we left. When we got back, it had blown up to the size of, I would say, like half size of a baseball over on his right side. And so I said, okay, we got to take him to the emergency room immediately. He's having difficulty breathing. So we dropped my mother-in-law off. Luckily, she's there. She can stay with the rest of the kids. Becky, myself, take our boy to the hospital. So Becky ends up going into labor. Jace has to go into emergency surgery on his neck because of the issues he's having with breathing and the thing growing. And I'm in such rough shape. And, I'm drinking in between bouts, like with airplane whiskeys, and pouring them into Coke bottles. That was just how I was able to cope with life at that point. But I'm literally going back and forth between Jace was on the 5th floor having emergency surgery. Becky's giving labor on the 3rd floor. And at this point, it was my left leg. It wasn't working anymore. It was in so much pain. So I'm like dragging my leg from operating room to operating room. So finally, Jace gets out of surgery. He's doing good. He's stable. Becky gives birth to our boy Jojo. Everybody's good there. The doctors were able to encourage me to go to imaging. We go down to imaging, and it shows that I have a deep vein thrombosis, a blood clot in my leg. And because we didn't move on it, it had broken off and got into both lungs, of bilateral pulmonary embolism. And they're like, this is an extremely high mortality rate. We have a very small window here to break this up. So in the span of like 12 hours, all of us were in 3 different emergency rooms there at the hospital, all being treated separately. So it was pretty wild. My boy Jace went on to have like a ridiculous amount of surgeries. His last one was at Seattle Children's Center, and finally removed it for good. And he was in the ICU. It was very difficult recovery. And I knew I had lost my identity. Everything I was wrapped up in being a special forces operator. That's just what I knew. It's what I aligned with. The thought of being anything other than that, it just didn't even register. And now that was gone, I don't know how to communicate it, but it was like, what do you mean that's gone? What am I supposed to do now? I thought I was put here to do this. What else am I supposed to do? Then I have all the psychological, the cognitive, the physiological issues that have just derailed my life. And now my boy is incredibly sick. It was just the most difficult circumstance. So I'm there with my boy Jace in the ICU. And I had this moment of clarity there with him. And as I looked at him, and I realized that the path that I was on was going to kill me, no doubt about it. But worse than that, it was going to ruin everything it is I said I loved. And so at that moment, something came over me, and I made this promise right there, a bedside promise to my boy and myself. It was 3 things. Number 1, I would find a way to return to the man of my pre-injury status. Number 2, I was going to find a way to come off all the medication that I was told I would have to be on for the rest of my life to have some semblance of normalcy. And I didn't care what mountain had to be scaled, what wall had to be pushed through. I didn't care what anybody said about it. I didn't care where I had to go, how much it cost, nothing. Because in my mind, those 2 things were non-negotiable. And once they were accomplished, number 3 was I was going to turn around and help individuals and families that found themselves in the exact same situation that I found myself in. And non-negotiable. That was where we were going to go from there. And so that was, like, Derek, the punch in the face. I'm sure there was things that incrementally led to that, but at that moment, it was like lightning struck, and that had reinvigorated me with a sense of purpose. And that was, okay, if I can't be a Green Beret, well, then what can I be? Well, I can be the best version of myself. I have a wife who's counting on me. I have a family who's counting on me. That's enough. I also know I'm not the only one experiencing this. There's a whole community being decimated, and we're not doing anything about it. I'm going to put my efforts and my energy there. And that was enough to move me from one line of time and put me in a new line of time where I started to ask better questions. I started to say, what would life be like if I thought this way? What would life be like if I acted this way? What would life be like if I was like this? And then I simply just charted a course towards that.